They say you never truly know who you're dealing with until the final reveal. Imagine stepping onto a plane weary from travel only to be met with disdain because of your looks. Your hair, your skin, your identity insulted in front of hundreds of onlookers. This is exactly what happened to Ebony Lane, a proud black woman sporting intricate braids on a routine flight. No one expected her to challenge the power structure of an entire airline until they discovered that she wasn't just a passenger, but a secret investor in their very company. Brace yourself for a journey of audacity, hidden alliances, and ultimate karma. The alarm on Ebony Lane's phone buzzed at exactly 4:45 a.m. She had barely caught 2 hours of sleep, yet she rose with determined grace. The day was set for an important flight from John F. Kennedy International Airport in New York to Los Angeles, a routine route for many. But for Ebony, it carried unusual significance. She was traveling for a high-stakes meeting concerning her investment portfolio, one that directly influenced the well-being of thousands of airline employees across the country. She stood before her mirror, wearing a flowing peach-colored blouse and fitted slacks. Her braids, meticulously done the night before, cascaded gracefully over her shoulders. The style reflected both her pride in her heritage and her determination to present herself with unapologetic authenticity. She was no stranger to how people sometimes reacted to her hair, from curious stares to snide remarks. But she always carried herself with unwavering confidence. Ebony was a shrewd businesswoman who had learned to navigate the corporate world's hidden corridors. As she locked her apartment door and headed for the waiting car service, she had no inkling that the day's trials would test her composure in ways she never thought possible, and ultimately reveal the extraordinary power she wielded. Upon arriving at John F. Kennedy International Airport, Ebony breathed in the electrifying hum of the bustling terminal. She allowed herself a moment to absorb the swirl of travelers, pulling suitcases, the scent of freshly brewed coffee from nearby kiosks, and the overhead announcements about departing flights. As a frequent flyer, she rarely gave these sounds and sights more than a passing thought. But today felt different. Her intuition nagged at her, warning that something was off. She proceeded to the Delta Airlines check-in counter, where she planned to verify her boarding pass. A young agent with a friendly smile greeted her. Ebony smiled back, appreciative of a positive start to the day. The agent scanned her ticket, verified her identification, and wished her a pleasant flight. Ebony exhaled in relief. Perhaps the day's unease was just an overactive imagination. Moments later, as she walked toward the security checkpoint, Ebony's phone buzzed. It was an email reminder about the corporate meeting in Los Angeles, one that would finalize her additional investment in the airline's parent company. Little did the staff around her realize that the simple passenger passing through the airport was on the verge of sealing a deal that might indirectly determine their annual bonuses and job stability. The calm began to dissipate at the security line. Ebony placed her carry-on bag onto the conveyor belt. Inside were her laptop, personal documents, and a thick folder labeled confidential. She also removed her shoes, placed her phone in a plastic bin, and readied herself for the routine body scan. As Ebony stepped forward, a TSA agent performed the usual pat-down. She felt a slight hesitation in the agent's hands near her braids. Ebony cast a questioning glance at the agent, who gave a curt nod and waved her on, not offering any explanation. Although this wasn't the first time she'd experienced mild scrutiny because of her hair, something about the agent's demeanor struck Ebony as dismissive, if not outright rude. She whispered a small sigh of frustration under her breath. She reminded herself that small slights were often unintentional, the results of ignorance or routine tension at airports. But what she didn't realize was that this was merely a prelude, a subtle prologue to the wave of hostility brewing beyond the security gates. Had Ebony known then how events would spiral, she might have braced herself for battle. Instead, she pressed forward, determined to maintain her composure and focus on her important day ahead. With security behind her, Ebony headed to her designated gate 47, for the 7:30 a.m. flight to Los Angeles. The digital board overhead displayed the flight status as on time. Satisfied, she found a seat near a window overlooking the runway. She sent a quick text to her business associate, Marina Pierce, confirming their meeting later that afternoon. A few minutes later, an announcement crackled through the PA system. Attention all passengers on Flight 280 to Los Angeles. We're experiencing a slight delay due to mechanical checks. Please remain near the gate for further updates. Ebony frowned slightly, but took it in stride. Delays were part and parcel of air travel. Around her, a few other passengers began to grumble, restless at the prospect of any inconvenience. Ebony popped in her earphones, determined to take advantage of the extra time by reviewing the confidential documents in her folder. These pages spelled out significant figures and details, the exact stakes Ebony held in the airline's parent company, the net worth of her investment, and the terms of the deal she was about to close. Ironically, the staff hustling around the gate had no inkling that among them sat one of their biggest, albeit silent, benefactors. The real trouble started when Ebony decided to stretch her legs. She rose from her seat, tucked her folder into her carry-on, and headed to a small cafe next to the gate. The line was short, only 2 other customers ahead. She waited patiently as the barista, a cheerful college student, handled orders with a friendly efficiency that brightened Ebony's mood. She asked for a chai latte and stepped aside to wait. As she stood there, she couldn't help overhearing a conversation from 2 flight attendants wearing Delta uniforms. They were seated at a nearby table, discussing details of the flight. Apparently, they were part of the cabin crew assigned to Ebony's flight. "Did you see that woman with the braids in row 12 earlier?" one attendant remarked. She was giving the check-in crew a hard time about something. The second attendant shrugged and mumbled something inaudible. Ebony's ears perked up. She wondered if they were referring to her. However, she couldn't recall giving anyone a hard time. Ebony tried to ignore it. People talk especially when they assume no one is listening. Yet a growing sense of foreboding pressed into Ebony's chest as she picked up her latte and returned to the gate area. Sometimes illusions of conflict brew quietly before they explode center stage. Finally, the overhead monitor announced boarding for Flight 280. The gate attendant called for first class and priority passengers to line up. Ebony often booked first class for comfort during long flights, especially because her schedule demanded she land ready to operate at full capacity. Yet she never flaunted her upgrades, preferring a calm, low-profile presence. As Ebony approached, the same pair of flight attendants she'd overheard in the cafe stood beside the boarding agent, scanning passes. One of them, an older gentleman with crisp lines in his uniform, gave Ebony a cursory once-over as she handed over her boarding pass. He didn't offer the warm smile or welcome aboard Ebony had seen him extend to other travelers before her. Instead, his mouth tightened into a forced line and his eyes flicked up at her braids. Ebony felt a stab of irritation. She had encountered microaggressions before and learned to brush them off, but something in her gut told her to remain vigilant. This was no ordinary instance of someone having a bad day. She boarded the plane politely, nodded at the welcoming flight attendant standing in the first-class galley, and found her seat in 3A. She settled in, determined to keep her dignity intact, regardless of what might follow. Settling into the plush seat, Ebony appreciated the bit of extra legroom and the sense of calm in the first-class cabin. As the other passengers trickled in, Ebony noticed fleeting glances from the flight attendant who had scanned her boarding pass. His name tag read Howard. He was making small talk with other first-class passengers, complimenting one man's suitcase, joking about the weather, but he pointedly avoided Ebony. She thought of letting it go. After all, flight attendants have tough jobs, hectic schedules, dealing with demanding travelers, and ensuring safety. Why dwell on a possible slight? Yet Ebony's disquiet grew when Howard spoke to the passenger across the aisle. A middle-aged man in a business suit about the updated arrival time and offered him a pre-departure beverage. Ebony cleared her throat, expecting Howard to extend the same courtesy. Instead, he turned and walked toward the galley without a word. Feeling snubbed, Ebony debated whether to say something. Drawing attention to potential discrimination is a delicate dance. Choose your battles wisely. This was Ebony's mantra hammered into her by years of boardroom negotiations. She decided to stay silent for the moment. Maybe it was just an oversight. But with every second, the tension coiled tighter, like a spring ready to snap. As passengers settled, the cabin door was secured. Another attendant, a woman named Carla. Her name tag, clearly visible, began the standard safety briefing. Meanwhile, Ebony noticed Howard whispering into Carla's ear, casting sideways glances at Ebony. Without warning, Carla turned off her mic and strode to Ebony's row with purposeful steps. "Excuse me, Miss Carla," said her voice stiff. "We received a complaint that you might be using a personal electronic device that could disrupt our equipment." Ebony blinked in confusion, holding only a hardcover book in her hands. Her phone was powered down inside her bag. Ebony calmly responded, "I'm not using any device." "There must be a misunderstanding." Carla glanced at Ebony's braids, as if they were the source of her suspicion. "We'll have to ask you to power off your devices until we're in the air." The entire exchange felt off, designed to single Ebony out. Passengers around them watched with curiosity. Ebony could sense their silent question. Why was this happening? Ebony felt her pulse quicken, but she maintained her composure. "My devices are already off," she repeated firmly. Carla's expression soured, and she turned sharply on her heel to return to the aisle. The slight was unmistakable. Ebony was being singled out for no legitimate reason. When Carla moved on to rejoin Howard, Ebony became aware of a subtle shift among the other passengers in the first-class cabin. A young woman in the seat behind Ebony leaned forward and whispered, "I saw you were just reading a book." That was weird. Ebony offered a courteous nod, acknowledging her support. Across the aisle, the businessman who had been offered a pre-departure drink furrowed his brow and looked at Ebony sympathetically. He glanced at the flight attendants, then at Ebony, almost apologetically. Though Ebony appreciated these silent gestures, they did little to ease the heavy feeling of being marked as a troublemaker. The aircraft finally pushed back from the gate, and the usual hum of takeoff procedures commenced. Ebony made a mental note. Keep calm, gather facts, and if necessary, file a complaint after the flight. She'd handled bigger confrontations in boardrooms, so an unruly flight crew shouldn't be too daunting. Yet she couldn't ignore the uneasy sense that the worst was yet to come. She could see Carla and Howard exchanging whispers and occasionally shooting her a disdainful look. Ebony's confidence braced her like a shield, but even her resilient spirit could feel the weight of suspicion in the recycled cabin air. Shortly after takeoff, the captain announced moderate turbulence. The seatbelt sign blinked on, and passengers were advised to remain seated. Flight attendants suspended service, scurrying to secure the galley. Ebony used the lull to gather her thoughts. The plane shook slightly, rattling trays and overhead bins. Ebony took measured breaths, reminding herself that turbulence is normal. She gazed out the window at the pale morning sky, pondering the significance of the upcoming investor meeting. In just a few hours, she would finalize her additional stake in the airline's parent company, an infusion of capital that would trickle down to salaries improvements and expansions. How ironic, she mused, that the same employees who might benefit from her investment were making her flight experience needlessly stressful. The turbulence subsided, and the seatbelt sign dinged off. Howard emerged from the galley, pushing a cart to offer beverages. He stopped at the row before Ebony served them politely, then approached Ebony. Without looking her directly in the eye, he stated, "Beverage." Ebony asked for water, and Howard handed her a cup with no straw, no napkin, nothing. His face remained impassive, but the tension was thick as smog. Despite the slight, Ebony chose not to escalate. Yet deep inside her chest, a spark of defiance burned. Ebony's seatmate, a chatty woman named Teresa, had watched the interactions with growing concern. Once Howard rolled the cart away, Teresa leaned closer and whispered, "I saw how they spoke to you. Are you okay?" Teresa's soft grey eyes and gentle smile radiated genuine worry. She explained she was a middle school teacher, heading to Los Angeles for a conference. Ebony appreciated her concern and offered a polite nod. "I'm fine. I'm used to her handling people like them." Ebony hesitated, debating whether to reveal her status as a major investor. For the moment, she decided to keep that card close to her chest. Teresa nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes I see this happen with my students. Certain kids get singled out for the smallest things, especially if they look different. Braids cultural clothing. It's heartbreaking." Ebony appreciated Teresa's empathy, but a lingering sadness welled up inside her. This was exactly what Ebony had been fighting her entire life, from corporate hallways to everyday encounters. She sighed, grateful at least to have someone in her corner. As she sipped her water, Ebony decided that no matter what unfolded next, she would remain dignified. Yet she couldn't suppress the mounting feeling that a showdown loomed on the horizon. An hour into the flight, Ebony managed to immerse herself in her confidential documents, occasionally jotting down notes. The cabin had quieted. Some passengers watched in-flight movies, others napped. Howard and Carla were busy serving the cabin. For a brief moment, Ebony felt a fragile sense of normalcy. Then from behind, she heard hushed giggles. She peered over her shoulder and saw Carla leaning across the aisle, whispering with another attendant. They both shot Ebony a pointed look, then laughed again. Ebony's patience, already stretched thin, began to fray. She felt her pulse beat in her temples. She pressed the flight attendant call button, determined to address the situation. If it escalated, Ebony would do what she always did best, handle it with calm and composure. But Carla ignored the call button, continuing her conversation, as if Ebony didn't exist. After a few minutes, Ebony pressed it again, this time more firmly. Eventually, Howard approached. He turned off the button above Ebony's arms folded. "Yes," he said, his tone devoid of warmth. Ebony inhaled. "Is there a reason my service requests are being ignored? I've seen you respond to others promptly." Howard's eyes narrowed. "We're a bit busy. Please be patient." His dismissive tone was drenched in contempt. The fuse was officially lit. The tension in first class ratcheted up several notches, drawing the attention of nearby passengers. Teresa put a reassuring hand on Ebony's arm, silently encouraging her to remain calm. Ebony, heart pounding, repeated her question in a measured tone. "I noticed you and Carla have served other passengers more attentively. Is there an issue I should know about?" Howard's lips tightened. "Ma'am, we serve everyone equally. If you don't feel that's the case, you can fill out a complaint form later." Before Ebony could respond, Carla appeared, arms akimbo. "Is there a problem here?" Ebony looked from Howard to Carla. She could see in Carla's eyes a mix of annoyance and something that felt strangely personal. "Yes," Ebony replied. "I feel I'm being singled out and treated differently. I'd like to know why." Carla made a dismissive sound in her throat. "We treat everyone according to policy." Passengers in adjacent seats looked on, some shifting uncomfortably. A middle-aged woman across the aisle frowned, and Ebony could practically feel the unspoken question floating in the cabin. Why were they targeting Ebony? Ebony's composure wavered for the first time. She let out a slow breath, fighting the urge to lash out. If she had to fight, she would do so gracefully but effectively. Once Howard and Carla walked away, Teresa turned to Ebony. "I'm so sorry this is happening. Do you think it's because of—" Her voice trailed off, but Ebony understood. They both knew prejudice when they saw it, especially Ebony, who'd spent a lifetime navigating it. The gentleman across the aisle, who had earlier been offered a drink pre-departure, leaned over. "I've flown with Delta for years. This is highly unusual. I can't help but notice they seem hostile. If you need a witness for a complaint later, I'm more than willing." Ebony nodded gratefully, a swirl of conflicting emotions inside her. She remembered the major role she played behind the scenes in this very airline's financial health. The blatant disrespect from these employees struck a nerve deeper than any typical microaggression. It wasn't just personal. It felt like a betrayal of the values she thought the airline stood for. She gazed at the seat in front of her, mentally replaying everything that had happened since she boarded. Although Ebony had initially decided to let it go, each new slight was fueling a quiet, controlled anger. If the staff thought they were harassing just another faceless passenger, they were gravely mistaken. But Ebony still needed the right moment to deliver that revelation. Midway through the flight, the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. "Good morning, folks. This is Captain Richardson speaking. We're expecting a smooth remainder of the flight with an on-time arrival in Los Angeles. As a reminder, we appreciate your cooperation with the crew." Carla appeared at the front of the cabin, microphone in hand. "We'd like to remind all passengers that disruptive behavior and non-compliance with crew instructions can result in consequences, including removal from the aircraft. We thank you for your cooperation." Ebony's eyes snapped up. She could feel Carla's gaze slicing straight in her direction. The underlying message was clear: any further pushback from Ebony, and they could label her disruptive. It was a not-so-subtle threat, delivered under the guise of an official announcement. Now Ebony's anger kindled into resolve. She was not about to be bullied into silence, but she also knew that any misstep could give them ammunition to make her disembark or even face allegations. She thought carefully about her next move. The entire first-class cabin seemed to hold its breath. Teresa squeezed Ebony's hand reassuringly, and the businessman across the aisle gave a subtle shake of his head, as if to say, "This is unacceptable." Ebony glanced at her watch. They had about 3 hours left to land, and she suspected those 3 hours would define her entire day, and possibly some careers. The tension continued to simmer until lunchtime service began. Carla and Howard distributed meals which in first class usually come on a tray with a selection of entrees. When they reached Ebony, Carla dropped the tray table with a loud click, placed the tray down with a jarring thud, and moved on without a single word or gesture. Ebony looked at the meal, no cutlery, no napkin, and the entree lid slightly askew, as if Carla had slammed it down in haste. The rest of first class received neatly arranged trays with proper utensils. Ebony raised her hand politely. "Excuse me, I need utensils." Carla didn't even turn around. A wave of murmurs passed through the cabin. People were noticing the blatantly unfair treatment. Teresa, ever supportive, pressed her call button. Finally, Howard approached with an exasperated expression. "Yes?" Ebony calmly replied. "I need utensils. And a napkin like every other passenger." Howard let out a sigh that practically screamed inconvenienced. He retrieved a plastic-wrapped utensil set from the cart and unceremoniously tossed it onto Ebony's tray. It fell partly on her entree, splattering sauce on the tray table. Ebony closed her eyes, inhaling a steadying breath. She knew she had to keep her composure, but every nerve in her body screamed for a more decisive response. As Ebony dabbed at the spilled sauce with a beverage napkin, her thoughts churned. She weighed the pros and cons of going public right there in the cabin about her role as a major investor. Her usual style was to maintain a low profile, stepping in only when absolutely necessary. But this was no ordinary flight, and the hostility had reached a boiling point. She imagined standing up, announcing her stake in the airline, and watching Howard's and Carla's smug expressions evaporate into shock. She envisioned other passengers pulling out phones to record the moment the powerful secret investor schooled these employees. A surge of satisfaction threatened to take hold. Yet Ebony also considered the potential backlash. Making a scene might overshadow the issues of discrimination at play. It could turn into a spectacle that ironically might paint her as another angry black woman, a stereotype she loathed and fought against. She also thought about the meeting in Los Angeles, how she needed to stay focused and professional. In her chest, a storm raged between wanting immediate vindication and maintaining strategic composure. Ultimately, Ebony decided to continue observing. Sometimes letting people hang themselves with their own rope was far more effective. She'd wait for the right moment to strike. As the flight neared its midpoint, Ebony decided she had endured enough. She pressed the call button, and to her surprise, a different flight attendant appeared, an older woman named Linda, who had been serving economy. Linda's demeanor was calm and empathetic. "How can I help you, ma'am?" she asked gently. Ebony explained the repeated incidents, the rudeness, the lack of service, the pointed announcement about disruptive passengers. Linda's face fell. "I'm so sorry this is happening," she murmured. "I'll let the captain know." It was clear Linda felt stuck in a precarious situation. Rank and seniority among flight crews can complicate standing up for what's right. Still, she promised she would speak to Captain Richardson. Ebony thanked her, feeling a glimmer of hope. 20 minutes later, Linda returned. She bent down to speak quietly, so as not to draw further attention. "The captain says he'll speak to Howard and Carla. He asked me to tell you that if you feel unsafe or harassed, he'll arrange for you to speak privately with him after landing." Ebony appreciated the effort, but she also saw the subtext. They wanted to avoid a mid-flight confrontation. Ebony nodded in acceptance. She was nothing if not patient when it served a purpose. As the plane began its descent, an unexpected twist jolted the already tense atmosphere. Carla approached Ebony's seat, a severe expression etched across her features. In a voice loud enough to draw attention from surrounding passengers, she said, "We have a missing item from the galley, and we were told you went back there earlier." Ebony's eyes widened in disbelief. "I haven't left my seat except to use the restroom with Teresa." She gestured to her seatmate, who nodded in agreement. Carla's tone turned accusatory. "That's not what I was told. If you took anything from the galley, you need to return it." Teresa gasped, and the businessman across the aisle shook his head in open astonishment. Ebony felt a wave of heat flush her face. This was not just disrespect. It was a direct, baseless accusation of theft. Howard sidled up behind Carla, arms crossed, wearing a smug smile. Ebony took a calming breath. "I assure you I haven't taken anything. Whoever told you that is mistaken." Passengers in nearby rows exchanged incredulous looks. Some quietly murmured objections. The cabin's oxygen seemed to thin as Ebony met Carla's glare, her heart pounding at the injustice of it all. In that moment, Ebony knew the time for silence was over. Ebony rose from her seat, slowly conscious of every eye in the first-class cabin, turning toward her. She smoothed her blouse, the movement deliberate, as if steeling herself for a momentous announcement. "I didn't want to have to do this," she began, her voice even. "But enough is enough." Carla and Howard exchanged quick, confused glances. Carla managed to scoff. "Is that so?" Ebony ignored the snide remark. She reached down into her carry-on and pulled out a folder labeled Confidential. With measured composure, she flipped it open to a page showing her name next to a large figure, a portion of the investment capital she controlled. She held it up so both attendants could see. "I'm Ebony Lane. I'm a significant investor in Delta's parent company. My money funds part of your operations, including staff salaries." The murmurs among passengers exploded into audible gasps and scattered applause. Teresa's eyes lit up with shock and admiration. The businessman across the aisle broke into a wide grin. He looked at Howard, who now paled visibly. Ebony continued, voice unwavering. "I do not appreciate false accusations or discriminatory behavior. You may want to reconsider how you treat passengers, especially ones who sign your paycheck, in a manner of speaking." For a moment, time seemed to suspend in the first-class cabin. Carla and Howard stood, frozen disbelief etched on their faces. The hush that followed Ebony's proclamation was broken by a chorus of murmured exclamations from other passengers. A few even began clapping softly in support. Teresa shot up from her seat, brimming with indignation on Ebony's behalf. "She's been discriminated against this entire flight, and now you accuse her of theft without evidence. This is unacceptable." Her voice quivered with anger, but her words rang clear. A woman 2 rows ahead chimed in. "I've been watching how you treated her. You're in big trouble." The businessman across the aisle nodded and added, "I witnessed everything. I'll back her up." Under the scrutiny of a dozen angry faces, Howard's confidence crumbled. He looked at Carla, whose eyes darted around wildly, searching for an escape. The entire ordeal had unraveled spectacularly. Meanwhile, Ebony stood tall, letting her sudden revelation settle into the consciousness of everyone present. At that moment, Linda emerged from the economy cabin, eyes wide with alarm. She had clearly heard the commotion. Ebony gave Linda a small, reassuring nod, silently conveying that the story was now fully out in the open. Sensing the heightened tension, Linda hurried to the flight deck. Moments later, Captain Richardson himself stepped out, adjusting his cap. His brow creased when he saw the cluster of passengers standing in support of Ebony and Carla and Howard, practically cornered at the front of the aisle. "What's going on here?" the captain asked, his authoritative voice cutting through the clamor. Ebony offered a respectful nod. "Captain, I apologize for the disturbance. I've experienced repeated harassment and false accusations from these two flight attendants. I felt compelled to reveal my position as an investor in this airline. I won't stand for mistreatment. A worried expression flickered across the captain's face. I see. He turned to Carla and Howard, who both stood rigid. Is this true? Carla attempted to defend herself. Captain, she was. Howard, looking desperate, interjected. She's been causing disruption since boarding. Captain Richardson raised a hand, silencing them. I heard quite a different story from Linda, and I see multiple passengers corroborating Ms. Lane's account. He glanced around the cabin, meeting the eyes of each passenger nodding in support. We have about 30 minutes before landing. I suggest you both return to the galley, and we'll resolve this once we're on the ground. The remainder of the flight passed in tense silence. Ebony resumed her seat, quietly reviewing the final details for her Los Angeles meeting. She reminded herself to breathe to stay calm and to trust that justice would prevail. Upon landing at Los Angeles International Airport, Captain Richardson made a quick announcement. On behalf of Delta Airlines, we appreciate your patience and cooperation today. We'll be arriving at Gate 75. We ask all passengers to remain seated momentarily. As the plane taxied, Ebony felt an odd calm wash over her. She had endured blatant discrimination, but she also asserted her dignity and revealed her strategic position. Teresa squeezed Ebony's hand one last time, offering a gentle, triumphant smile. When the plane parked at the gate, 2 airline supervisors boarded, summoned by the captain. Passengers were asked to disembark row by row, but Ebony was requested to stay behind, along with Carla and Howard. On the way out, several passengers stopped by Ebony's seat, thanking her for speaking up and wishing her luck. The businessman offered his contact information, pledging to support her complaint. Ebony smiled gratefully, her confidence reaffirmed. Outside the aircraft door, Ebony could see Carla and Howard talking in hushed, frantic tones with the supervisors. Their faces wore the unmistakable hue of panic. After the last passenger exited, Ebony stepped into the jet bridge, where 2 airline supervisors, Heather and Miguel, waited alongside the anxious flight attendants. Captain Richardson stood off to the side, arms folded, watchful but silent. Heather, a poised woman with a professional demeanor, spoke first. Ms. Lane. I'm Heather Foster, the operations supervisor. This is Miguel Hernandez, our customer service supervisor. We'd like to understand exactly what happened during the flight. Ebony gave a concise but thorough account, from the initial microaggressions to being denied courtesy items publicly accused of theft and singled out in that menacing announcement. She made sure to include the supportive statements of fellow passengers. Miguel nodded gravely. I'm terribly sorry you experienced this. Your calm handling of the situation speaks volumes. We're prepared to investigate thoroughly, and immediate steps will be taken if our policies have been violated. Heather offered Ebony a sincere apology on behalf of the airline. She then turned to Carla and Howard. Do you have anything to say in your defense? Carla, voice shaking, blurted. We followed protocol. She was being difficult from the start. Howard nodded in agreement, but his voice faltered. We never meant, we didn't know who she was. Ebony's eyebrows shot up. So if I were an ordinary passenger, you think this behavior would be acceptable? The question hung in the air like a gavel striking the end of a trial. Heather exchanged a look with Miguel, then faced Carla and Howard. Her expression was cool, professional. We've spoken to Captain Richardson, who corroborates the claims. We've also received multiple statements from first-class passengers. We can't ignore the evidence. Miguel added, You both are suspended, pending a full investigation. We take allegations of discrimination very seriously, and false accusations of theft are a breach of trust with our customers." Carla's face blanched, and she stammered, "Wait, you can't do this." "We have families." Howard's shoulders slumped. He dropped his gaze to the floor, speechless. The threat of losing their income now became palpably real, an ironic twist considering their earlier contemptuous behavior toward Ebony. Ebony offered no glee at their predicament. She simply watched the karma unfold, stoic. After a lifetime of experiencing discrimination, she had learned that the wheels of justice can turn slowly, but they do turn. This time, they had turned swiftly, delivering immediate consequences. With that, Heather escorted Carla and Howard down the jet bridge. The shadow of an uncertain future clung to their slumped figures. Ebony exhaled a quiet breath of relief. She had stood her ground and vindicated not just herself, but anyone who had ever been humiliated in such a manner. Beyond the jet bridge, Ebony followed Heather and Miguel to a private lounge at LAX, where a small delegation from Delta's executive team had gathered upon hearing the news that a significant investor had been harassed on one of their flights. Among them was Mark Peterson, the airline's VP of Customer Relations, and Angela Sterling, the CFO's chief of staff. Ebony was ushered into a quiet conference room. She took a seat at a large wooden table, the same confidential folder resting on her lap. Though still tense from the in-flight ordeal, she recentered herself. These were the real decision-makers, the people who oversaw the airline's culture and policies. Mark Peterson spoke first. "Ms. Lane, I can't apologize enough. We heard about the situation and came directly here to address it. You have our full attention." Angela Sterling nodded, her demeanor respectful but earnest. "We had no idea you were flying with us today. Obviously, this should never happen to any passenger, let alone someone of your stature." Ebony cleared her throat. "I'm not looking for special treatment because of my investment, but I do expect the airline to enforce policies against discriminatory behavior. What I experienced today was inexcusable." The meeting, Ebony realized, was more than just about an apology. It was about shaping the airline's future policies and possibly about Ebony finalizing her investment decision under new conditions. In that quiet room, Ebony found herself switching from a wronged passenger to a savvy business negotiator. Mark Peterson outlined Delta's plan to conduct a thorough investigation, promising zero tolerance for discriminatory conduct. Angela Sterling took notes, occasionally glancing up with an expression of genuine remorse. "While we sincerely hope you'll still proceed with your planned investment, we understand if you have reservations," Angela offered. "We value your partnership deeply." Ebony took a moment to reflect. This was the prime opportunity to make a real difference, not just for herself, but for countless other passengers who might face similar treatment. "I plan to follow through," she began, "but I want assurances." She listed her conditions. 1. Mandatory diversity and inclusion. Training for all cabin crew. 2. Strict accountability measures for discriminatory behavior with clear consequences. 3. A promise that the airline would invest in outreach programs for minority communities, reflecting a commitment to diversity at every level. As Ebony spoke, the airline executives nodded, scribbling down her demands. She didn't intend to hold the airline hostage. Rather, she wanted a tangible shift in culture. When she finished, Mark Peterson extended his hand. "We can absolutely make this happen, Ms. Lane." Ebony shook his hand, the weight of the day's events beginning to lift from her shoulders. Small acts of justice often pave the way for profound change. After nearly an hour of discussion, The meeting concluded with a renewed sense of collaboration and accountability. Ebony Lane had not only defended her dignity, she had redefined the power dynamic between passengers and corporations. As she rose from the conference table, Delta's executives stood too, each offering a firm handshake and words of gratitude. Angela Sterling, the CFO's chief of staff, leaned in. "Ms. Lane, you've sparked conversations that will ripple through our entire company." Ebony smiled, still composed, but quietly resolute. "Good, because what happened up there, it can't happen again." With her confidential folder back in hand and a sense of purpose underfoot, Ebony walked through the corridors of LAX like a storm had passed, and she was the eye that had calmly held everything together. Her phone buzzed. It was Marina Pierce, her business partner. "Where are you?" "We're about to start the board meeting." Ebony tapped out a reply. "Just wrapped up another meeting. Had to handle some turbulence on and off the plane. Will explain soon. On my way." As she exited the executive lounge, airport noise washed over her rolling suitcases, snippets of conversation flight announcements overhead. Yet for Ebony, everything felt sharper now. Each sound reminded her of what she had just endured and what she had overcome. Outside, a sleek black Lincoln Navigator waited curbside. The driver opened the door, and Ebony stepped in with graceful ease. She glanced once more at the Delta terminal, the red triangle of its logo glowing in the afternoon sun. It had started as just another business trip, but the flight had become a battleground, and she had emerged not just unscathed, but transformed. During the ride to downtown Los Angeles, Ebony allowed herself a moment to reflect on Carla and Howard. Suspended, facing possible termination. She didn't take joy in their downfall, but she felt no regret either. Actions have consequences, especially when wielded from a place of arrogance and bias. She hoped, perhaps foolishly, that they'd use this moment to look inward. Maybe they'd ask themselves hard questions. Maybe they'd change. But even if they didn't, Ebony had done her part. Her mind shifted gears. The upcoming board meeting would finalize her expanded investment, a deal that would shape Delta's operational landscape for years to come. But now she had more than capital to bring to the table. She had leverage, influence, and a new condition, meaningful change rooted in accountability. The SUV pulled up to the Wilshire Grand Center, where the boardroom sat high above the city. Ebony stepped out, heels clicking on the pavement like a metronome of authority. As she entered the building, the concierge greeted her by name. She nodded graciously and headed for the elevators. Inside the elevator, she glanced at her reflection in the mirror. Her braids were still immaculate, her posture tall. The very image that had drawn scorn just hours earlier now felt like armor, unapologetic, regal, and resilient. She whispered to herself, a rare moment of vulnerability. "We're not invisible. Not anymore." The doors opened to the 73rd floor. Her stride was confident as she entered the boardroom, where Marina and the others waited. Heads turned. Phones were set down. Conversations paused. Ebony. Marina said with relief, "Everything okay?" Ebony gave a soft but certain smile. "Better than okay. Let's make history." And with that, she sat down, unfolded her documents, and began turning turbulence into transformation, one signed clause at a time. In the days following Flight 280, the turbulence didn't stop at the tarmac. News of the incident spread like wildfire, first through casual posts from passengers, then through trending hashtags and headlines. Videos and statements from Teresa the businessman and others who witnessed the in-flight harassment began circulating on X, formerly Twitter, TikTok, and LinkedIn. Within 24 hours, the phrase "hat investor on board" was trending globally. One viral tweet read, "Delta staff harasses black woman with braids, then learns she's a major investor funding their payroll." You really never know who you're talking to. It had over 1.2 million likes by the next morning. Clips of Ebony Lane calmly standing up in first class, presenting her confidential folder and announcing her stake in Delta's parent company, were stitched into TikToks, accompanied by music that ranged from Beyoncé's "Run the World" to Kendrick Lamar's "DNA." Some creators labeled her the most graceful clapback of 2025. Others made duets reenacting Howard and Carla's faces when the truth came out, turning the flight attendants into reluctant memes of poetic justice. Mainstream media soon picked up the story. CNN Business aired a segment titled "Tower at 30,000 feet, Investor Speaks Out Against In-Flight Discrimination." The New York Times ran a feature article the next week, headlined, "She was harassed for her hair." Then she revealed she owns part of the airline. Delta Airlines, now squarely under the magnifying glass, issued a public statement. "We are deeply troubled by the events reported on Flight 280. We are currently investigating the matter and have placed 2 employees on administrative leave pending the outcome. Delta is committed to maintaining a culture of inclusion and respect across all levels of service. We thank Ms. Lane for her poised professionalism and continued partnership." Some critics called the response "damage control" and questioned whether the airline would have acted so swiftly had Ebony not been a powerful investor. Others saw the incident as a long overdue reckoning and a rare instance of accountability where privilege was used for purpose. Inside Delta's internal network, whispers of change began circulating. Employees at multiple hubs were summoned to new training seminars, and HR departments were directed to update protocols on in-flight conduct and bias reporting. Anonymous surveys were distributed to all flight staff, asking for feedback on the culture of discrimination and inclusivity. A ripple had started, and it was gaining momentum. Meanwhile, Carla and Howard found themselves at the center of not only an internal investigation, but a public firestorm. Their names weren't officially released, but internet sleuths soon connected the dots. A video clip of Carla making the public disruptive behavior announcement had already gone viral. Online, she was labeled the flight attendant who tried the wrong one. Howard fared no better with screenshots of his dismissive body language, shared alongside captions like, "This you, though." Some flight attendants publicly sympathized with Carla and Howard, claiming that service jobs come with stress and misinterpretation. Many more distanced themselves. A growing number of Delta staff used the moment to speak out about a culture of selective courtesy and unspoken bias in first-class cabins. In industry circles, Ebony Lane's name became legendary. Not just for her grace under pressure, but for the sheer impact her actions had. Executive boards across multiple airlines quietly discussed the incident in their closed-door meetings. If someone like Ebony could be humiliated in first class, what did that mean for average passengers who lacked the same resources or platform? Ebony, for her part, kept a dignified silence online. She didn't grant interviews, didn't participate in the media flurry. Instead, she let the moment speak for itself. Her team released only one statement: Ms. Lane remains committed to ensuring safe, respectful travel for all passengers and is working in partnership with Delta Airlines to help shape new policies aimed at equity and accountability. Back in her office days later, Ebony skimmed through hundreds of messages, many from strangers thanking her. "Because of you, I wore my braids to my job interview today," one woman wrote. Another added, "You stood up so we wouldn't have to stay silent." Ebony's smile was quiet, reflective. She hadn't sought attention. She'd simply refused to shrink. And the world, it seemed, had taken notice. On Flight 280, Ebony Lane didn't just reclaim her dignity, she reset the altitude of what power, poise, and justice could look like in the sky. A week later, Ebony Lane finally had a moment to breathe. She sat alone in her penthouse office high above the Los Angeles skyline. The sprawling view of city lights blinking to life against the deepening dusk felt symbolic, like illumination rising from the shadows. Her investment deal with Delta's parent company had officially closed. But more importantly, the ripple effects of her confrontation aboard Flight 280 had sparked the beginnings of real change. On her desk sat a stack of letters and printed emails. Many were from strangers, passengers who had read about her story. Airline employees thanking her for speaking up, and young professionals who now saw her as a symbol of resistance with elegance. One message stood out. "You reminded me that strength doesn't have to be loud. Sometimes it's simply refusing to bow." She sipped from a steaming mug of chamomile tea, letting the calmness center her. Her braids, still styled in the intricate pattern she wore during the flight, now felt like a crown more than ever. In their curves and coils lived a legacy of pride, struggle, and victory. What once drew contempt had become a banner of resilience. Her phone buzzed Marina again this time, with updates on Delta's internal diversity task force, which Ebony had agreed to consult on. The company was already planning a rollout of mandatory cultural competency training for all cabin staff. Policy drafts were underway. Executive board minutes now included a permanent agenda item, inclusivity measures. Ebony leaned back in her chair, thoughts drifting to the look on Carla's and Howard's faces when she revealed her role. Not to gloat, but to educate, to disrupt, to remind those who hold small powers that they wield them in service of others. She thought about all the ordinary people who faced discrimination every day without folders of stock options or boardroom access to shield them. That's who she'd really stood up for. And that's why she would continue to push for reform, not just in Delta, but across every space she entered. Outside the city pulsed with life. Horns honked, laughter echoed from sidewalk cafes, and planes blinked like sortus across the sky. Somewhere, someone else was boarding a flight. Ebony hoped they'd be treated with the respect they deserved. She turned off her desk lamp, the office now lit only by the city glow, and as she walked toward the elevator, she whispered to herself, soft but sure, "They'll remember, not just who I am, but what I stood for. Because sometimes the most powerful turbulence doesn't shake the plane, it shifts the world." In a single flight, Ebony Lane faced prejudice, stood her ground, and sparked a powerful chain of events. By revealing her role as a major investor, she taught everyone a lasting lesson. Beneath the surface of any ordinary passenger could lie an extraordinary force for change. This dramatic showdown reminds us all that no one should ever be judged by appearance alone, and that everyone from the everyday traveler to the highest executive deserves respect and dignity. If this story resonated with you, help spread its message. Share it with someone who needs to hear that one voice can indeed shake an entire system. Hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories that challenge the status quo. And don't forget to leave a comment about how you'd handle a similar situation. Together we can empower one another to rise above discrimination.